Good morning, everybody. It is Thorn. I'm in my car. It is the last day before I return to work tomorrow, and I decided to treat myself to a Starbucks drive-through. Feels like quite the luxury these days. So here I am. I'm about to run inside. I'm in my own driveway, right? That, I don't know if knowing that makes my car videos just a little bit more pathetic, that I'm almost always in the driveway of my own home. Like I could just go inside like a human, but I don't know. Something about like the liminal space of the car, like I'm in a pod waiting to be transitioned to the next phase of my life. Like I need just time to collect myself. Anyway. I have a Discord chat that I do with my Patreon folks every Sunday morning. So that's what's coming up next. So I don't have tons of time. But I've been wanting to make this video for a week or two now. And it's pertinent to the upcoming year, right? Well, it's 2021. So hello, the new year. Well, Happy New Year. I wanted to talk about reading goals and reading tracking. And, you know, it's a witchcraft channel, and that's mostly what I talk about, and I've made a lot of books about witchcraft. I've made a lot of books. I have made a couple of books about witchcraft. I've made a lot of videos about witchcraft books, but I wanted to talk more generally about reading and reading logging and tracking books, just because that's something that folks ask me about pretty routinely. I think because I love books so much, and because I often talk about books, I think I have accidentally deceived all of you into thinking that I read tons and tons. And I want to come clean and say that I don't read nearly as much as I would like to, or as I think people assume I do. And so I actually, like, people always ask me if I'm on Goodreads, and I do have an author account on Goodreads, but I don't do anything with it, except, read reviews and be sad. I'm kidding. I'm kind of not kidding, but it's, anyway. Can you tell I've had both sugar and caffeine? Yes, I have. I think people think that I must do a lot of tracking and I must read tons, and I don't do either of those things. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about why. So first of all, this is not me trying to shit on anybody who tracks their reading. I think that's awesome. I think that having that kind of data about yourself is really informative, and I think that it can motivate folks to read more. So I think that's great. Please do it. I do log books when I finish them. I've got a page in my bullet journal where I just write down the title and author, and I make a note if it's a reread. And mostly I do that, guys, because I've been known to sit down and read a book and be like, wait a second, have I read this before? I just, my memory is not awesome sometimes, and I have been known to buy books for a second time, take out books for a second time, sit down and read a book for a second time, and have no idea that I've already read it before. So having that reading log is helpful, just because I'm descending into senility as I sit here. Yeah, so anyway, that's the full extent of what I track. So some of the reasons why I don't get more specific than that. A lot of it is that I wouldn't know how to track some of the things I read. So much of, I think, kind of the book community, I'm like kind of as broad as possible. The bullet journal community, the book community, whatever. Like that's the emphasis is on books. But books is not the only kind of reading. And a lot of the reading that I do, especially as somebody with an academic background and academic aspirations, is not books. And so that stuff kind of gets lost. Oh, we had a cutoff there with iPhone malfunction. So most of the reading that I do these days isn't books. And if I don't get to log that, and like, I know I'm the boss of my own tracking. Like I could log that if I wanted to, but I haven't seen the Bujo spread that's like, how to track the hours that you stare into Oxford University Press's journal database, reading portions of articles until you find the one that you actually need to help you with your project. Like, how do I track all of that? Right? Is there a way to track the number of hours that you sit there on like JSTOR or the MLA archives, like looking for things? And Anyway, like that's kind of the not sexy side of reading. So realistically, I'm reading between 30 and 50 books a year. And usually kind of right in the middle. Like I ended up with like 41 in 2020. And like that was a pretty solid year as far as reading goes. And it just doesn't compare to some of the folks out there who are like, my goal is, 60 books or 100 books, or people who say that they can read a book a week. And like, I just can't do that. And I can't do that for lots of reasons. A lot of it, and this is pretty heavily discussed, right? But like a lot of it has to do with genre and what you like to read. I mean, it's wonderful that people read, and like volume is one way to measure how much you are reading, but the number of books that you read in a year says nothing about the quality of those books. And some of the things, like, and I think people should read whatever the hell they want, like regardless of quality, okay? But I think sometimes we use those numbers online to kind of like shame others unintentionally into like feeling bad for how little they read. And like there's just a really big difference between like I'm gonna read like Herman Melville's entire catalog versus like I read graphic novels or I read YAs or I read like those are different things. So I don't know, like I'm looking through my list of books read in 2020, and I read a lot of YA because formerly being a high school teacher and just loving the genre and writing a bit of that myself. I also really love graphic novels. I don't know, like kind of like my brain candy fiction. Like I read a couple of, I really don't like this. I don't know if there's another phrase for it, but chick lit. Like that's so dismissive. But they're not romance novels, but they're obviously geared towards women. I don't know, like they're always in the checkout aisle at like Target, right? Oprah's like book club, whatever. But it's written by women, so nobody thinks of it as literary fiction. Anyway, I digress. I read some of that, and of course witchcraft books. But like witchcraft books take forever too, because I like to do the exercises and really work through them. So even though like Psychic Witch is a great example. This is low-hanging fruit because it's everywhere, right? But like Psychic Witch is not a long book. It's not like 1,000 pages, okay? But there are so many exercises in it that if you're actually working through it the way Oren intends, like you're potentially spending months on this book. And like that's what it's for. It's not just to, like read in the tub and not do anything with. So even though it looks short, it's actually this really dense kind of, there's so much stuff packed in there. And a lot of witchcraft books are that way. So even though something is super duper short, it can take you for freaking ever. And that's good. Like books take however long they take. So I found that in previous years when I've tried to track my reading the way other people track their reading, it usually just made me feel kind of crappy because, like, people don't track academic articles on Goodreads, right? Like, people don't track, like, anthology article. Like, I don't know. So much of what I read just isn't books and isn't books the way we think of books. We write like graphic novels, things like that. And people have come up with lots of creative ways to track that stuff. But at that point, I kind of just don't care enough because I think the goal of tracking and reading goals is just to encourage more reading. And the way I've done that for myself is instead of tracking individual books, I look at time. So like I've set up a morning routine for myself in the last few months, and part of that routine is a half hour of reading. Like I do my journaling, I have my coffee, I feed the animals, whatever, and then I have half an hour of reading, and I can read anything I want. And that's the other reason why tracking like kind of goes to hell. It's because one thing that I really like doing when I have no obligations and I can just like sit around the house in my sweatpants or whatever, I like to sit in front of the bookcase and just pick whatever book looks appealing and read it for however long I want to, and then put it back on the shelf with no obligation to finish it. Or I don't know, like sometimes it's pleasurable just to sit and read a book without the obligation of starting in a particular place, like the beginning, or getting to the end. Like sometimes you just want to read like a favorite chapter, you know, or like sometimes you want to just like revisit with an old friend, but you don't need to reread it. Like I do that with Watership Down by Richard Adams a whole lot. That's a favorite book of mine. But I don't put the pressure on myself of having to finish it every single time because it's pleasurable just to sit there. So my husband is now on the porch looking at me because I've been sitting in the car, and I just forgot that I have a drink for him too, and it's probably cooling and I'm an idiot. So I will talk to you later. Bye.